inconsistent drawing or rendering. And I put this one on the list because what came to mind is I'll see someone's drawing and you'll see a poorly drawn figure and a really well drawn falcon on their shoulder or something like that. That'd be my example, right? And immediately I go, okay, so they had a really good reference of the falcon, but zero or bad reference on the human character. And so yeah, and I'll see this a lot where or it'll either happen that way or stylistically something doesn't match. So you'll have something that's more academically drawn next to something more Dr. Seussian, and you're like, okay, these worlds don't match. So having really good drawing consistency, and then I threw rendering in there as well because I see this more digitally than traditionally. Traditionally, people's paintings tend to be beginning paintings tend to be more consistent. I don't want to say this in a rude way, but consistently bad. Like if they're going to be bad, they're consistently bad. Digitally, because you can use digital tricks, I'll see people that have probably thrown a piece of reference underneath their on a lower layer and traced it. You know, so they're getting or even rendered over it. So now they're copying the rendering from a photo or
so it's like they created like a downtown street and they pulled that, you know, from their perspective class, but then cars are too hard to draw in perspective. So they found a photo reference of the car that's kind of in the same perspective, and they'll trace over that. And it's just not quite meshing, that kind of thing.
This might be a good time to talk about when it's okay to trace stuff. Because, I mean, you guys trace stuff sometimes, right? No?
Trace stuff?
I'm a big fan of that as training. I don't actually trace that much stuff in my everyday life, but one of my first exercises in my sophomore level class is I have everybody trace a head. A lot of times I use that classic Winston Churchill photo, and I give them tracing paper. And I said, all right, if we took away the drawing problems, everybody should be able to nail this. Everybody will do a perfect drawing, right? Because they're tracing. And I put them all up, and it's amazing how different all 20 are.
Oh, wow.
And so we talk about it. You're making artistic choices even when you're tracing.
Yeah, even when you're tracing.
So I love it as a training tool.
I will trace motifs sometimes just to get the feel of it. And then I'll continue on and put it in there, you know, different things like that, different architectures and things like that. But I think if you're tracing because you can't draw something in the perspective that it needs to be, just know that as you're doing that, you're delaying the inevitable. That if you're going to be successful as an illustrator, you're going to have to learn how to draw it in perspective. And it's actually pretty easy.
Anytime I trace, it's when I need to like really save time, and it's probably from a photo that I've taken. And if not, it's from a photo that I've altered. Photoshop, I'll either stretch it or mess with the proportions a little bit just so that it's like it becomes more mine. And then I trace over it in a way that it doesn't look like it's traced. So I'm adding my marks to it, my style to it.
Yeah, you're sort of modifying the framework, the underlying framework, and then you draw it on top.
Yeah, basically, I'm using it as sort of structure for the drawing.
Right. The only time I would also advocate for tracing is if likeness is an absolute must. One of the commercial schools that I studied at when I was going to school at Art Center, but I would always take a third term off and I'd go over to this other school called Associates in Art, and they were a real commercial driven school. A lot of the teachers worked in entertainment, like doing movie posters and stuff. And if you have to draw like Steve Buscemi, they would require exact photo reference of the angle. And they trace it because it has to be perfect.
What about?
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like Drew Struzan, if that's what he's doing, or
he's absolutely doing, because I worked with what was his name, Mark Westermo and Mike Butkus, and both of those guys worked under Drew Struzan and did comps for him and stuff, and they were all tracing.
Well, you mumbled a little bit. What was the first name? Mark
Westermo.
Westermo.
Mm-hmm.
Got to get that in there for the show notes.
Yeah, he was one of the main guys doing a lot of movie posters back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Were they taking the photos themselves, or were they working off of like studio photos?
The studio would provide them.
I see. That's interesting.